Welcome to this Euractiv Giga Europe digital debate supported by Giga Europe. I'm Brian Maguire. Our topic today is the Year of Skills. Is a digitized Europe learning what it takes to compete globally? And to leverage human potential and ensure that users in Europe fully benefit from evolving digital solutions, the EU has paired Europe's digital transition with the provision of digital skills. Under the framework of the 2030 Digital Agenda, the EU has set the target of at least 80% of all adults having basic digital skills. The EU's skills agenda sets objectives for the 2023 Year of Skills around investments in lifelong learning and ensuring Europe's competitiveness. This includes recognizing disparities in access to educational tools and devices. And to help achieve these objectives, several communications companies have launched initiatives to distribute devices and other learning aids for students and teachers, as well as providing secure, high-quality connectivity, which is especially vital in remote and rural areas. Today's challenge is that only 37% of adults take part in training opportunities on a regular basis, and over 75% of companies in the EU report facing challenges related to finding staff with appropriate skills. Joining us today to discuss these issues, Stefan Olsson is the Deputy Director General of DG Employment at the European Commission, Jorge Dimitrov, Head of Unit Digital Education, DG EAC, European Commission, Sylvie Brunet, Member of the European Parliament and also the Employment Committee there, Anders Lindholm, Councillor for Education Affairs, the Permanent Representation of Sweden to the EU, Rafaela Kira, Vice President of the Lifelong Learning Platform and European Civil Society for Education, and Thomas Mulder, Executive Director of HR, Internal Comms and Workplace at VodafoneZiggo. Great to have you all with us today. Thanks very much for taking the time. I'm going to ask our panelists just for a 60-second intro, their key message for today. And after that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Slido and how you can contribute questions throughout the session as well. So 60 seconds, more or less, for each of you just to kick off. Stefan, can I ask you to go first?
Sure, and many thanks to Euractiv and Giga Europe for organizing this event. Clearly, skills, competitiveness, and net zero policies form a triangle of our EU priorities. We've seen, I think it was really a watershed moment when skills was identified as one of the 4 pillars of the Green Deal industrial plan. We've been speaking about skills a long time, but making it a major element of an industrial policy document is new to me, and I think it shows the importance of the issue. If we look at the green side, we see that at least 40% of all jobs could be affected by the green transition. I'm sure we know that it's about changing the whole society, and so it will be even bigger than that. And looking then both at digital and green, this requires a total change of mindset, and I think that's what the European Year of Skills is about. That's why it was proposed by our president, and why the Swedish presidency and the European Parliament have provisionally agreed to the objectives of the year very recently. And that's why we're very happy that you have set up this event so we can look at this from different perspectives. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Stefan, thank you so much. Jorge, over to you. 60 seconds. You unmute? No, just give you a second. The team can help you out. Sylvie, you want to go next? 60 seconds, Sylvie.
Yes, of course. Do you hear me? It's okay.
I can hear you. I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much to Euractiv for this initiative. Very interesting. And hi, everybody. So in few words, I would like to say that I'm a member of the European Parliament since 2019. And before that, I was head of human resources in different private sector and public sectors. So for me, of course, the subject of skills, competencies is a huge subject, very major subject. I would like to add that to summarize my important legislative files during this mandate, I have been working on minimum wages, pay transparency, which is a main subject also, platform work, and now violence against women, especially at work. So I will just summarize my key message, which is the European Union will meet the challenge of the digital transition and stay competitive only if the EU includes all citizens with affordable and accessible programs to upskill and reskill its workforce. So I think, and we had a lot of discussions during concerning the European Year of. I was rapporteur for Renew Europe, and we all know that it's very important to include everybody. Just before we know that in the EU we have more than 40% of citizens. They have no basic digital skills, nothing. So it's a main point, and we will develop it after, of course.
Sylvie, thank you so much. Jorgi, I believe your sound is working now. Let's go back to you. 60 seconds, Jorgi.
Thank you, Brian. Let's hope so. Can you confirm?
Really perfect.
Great. Thank you to Euractiv and Giga Europe for the invitation. I will just build on what Stefan and Sylvie actually said, because the core is here about skills, but without education and training systems which are fit to develop this type of skills, it is very, very difficult to reach the types of objectives that we have set ourselves. And as the previous speaker said, Sylvie, we are a little bit far away from reaching those. So when it comes to digitalization, my core message is that in order to reach the type of digital skills that we have set ourselves at EU level, we need really two major priorities. On the one side, we need to promote an effective digital education ecosystem, meaning that we need access to education and skill development from various, let's say, channels, not just traditional ones, but more and more also online learning or blended learning. And the second very, very important priority is that we have to constantly and continuously develop digital skills, because they are moving all the time, and up and coming digital transformations like artificial intelligence show it very nicely. Thank you so far.
Jorgi, thank you. Okay, we'll come back to some of those issues for sure. Anders, over to you, 60 seconds.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this very important event. From my side, I think I will maybe just try to highlight the fact that digital skills and the need for digital skills and upskilling, reskilling really is something that goes across the entire labor market. I mean, just the latest weeks I've been in contact with the construction industry, with the facility managers, institutions, as well as the gaming industry, and they all talk about how much they are in need of a digital skilled workforce and how much is happening specifically in their areas. So to really understand that this is something that affects all of society in all economic sectors in different ways and in different magnitudes, but still, and that we also need to have an ongoing dialogue sector by sector, as well as an overarching one about how to really prepare for the digital transition and what is needed and what kind of upskilling and reskilling we can provide to facilitate these changes.
Anders, thank you so much. Raphael, over to you, 60 seconds.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be on this great panel on the question if digitalized European learning is what it takes to compete globally. I think it's clear that the digital transition is a fact and it can create more learning opportunities for a wider group of the population. However, we often tap into the mistake of focusing only on technical digital skills. And what is needed are skills to become creative, to find new solutions, to become more curious, but also more critical in an informed way. This requires actually transversal skills and key competences, such as personal, social, and learning to learn competences, but also citizenship competences. For instance, when we think about issues around data protection and internet safety. We also need to be aware that large numbers of the population are currently left behind by the digital transition. For instance, elderly people and people from disadvantaged socio-economic backgrounds, and other groups with limited or no digital skills who, for instance, are not able anymore to do bank transfers unaided, or who are not able to participate anymore in elections where voting computers are used. And this widens not only the digital, but also the social divide. So we believe from the LLLP that everyone from the very young to the very old should have the right to participate in quality education. And furthermore, creating an environment conducive to learning is key to increasing motivation for learning and to reaching out to a wider share of the population. And for this, we also need guidance for learners to navigate their way around the many learning offers that are there already, and quality must be paramount in learning provision.
Rafaela, thank you so much. And finally, Thomas, 60 seconds.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. When I went to the East Coast, to Silicon Valley for the first time, what struck me most was that the entrepreneurship that you see over there and the innovation actually started with the ambition to put a man on the moon. With NASA's ecosystem, they created an environment of learning, of development, and giving opportunities to the best talent. And when I came back to my company in the Netherlands, I realized that we were not doing great at that. So we implemented something that I call the Netflixification of learning. So we are making more than 10,000 trainings, online, offline, available to all our people. And since then, we quadrupled the number of learning interventions. Actually, we did that within a year. And we are also doing this for everybody, all our staff. And that equity point is something that Rafaela was also talking about just now, because in European society, we should not leave anyone behind. And research from the Vodafone Foundation learns us that 38% of teachers in Europe feels that they are not able to give the right education to their children when it comes to digital skills. And this is where companies like us are also taking their responsibility, and I'm happy to share more about that.
Thomas, thanks very much, first of all, for raising this man in the moon analogy as well. I really think it's super important. If you've seen the film Hidden Figures, which I watched recently with my daughters, it really binds all these elements together. It's talking about those who are disenfranchised in society but have amazing skills, being brought into a high technology workforce with ambition, and how the education system didn't discriminate through that as well. And so all these elements are bound together, and I want to talk a little bit more about that as well later on. So thank you for that, Thomas. Now, before we get into this full discussion, Slido is open now as well. Hashtag skills today. So if you go to Slido and put hashtag skills, you can scan on your phone there. The QR code's up on the screen for you. And just give you a moment to do that. We're going to take questions throughout the discussion, not just at the end. So begin sending those questions now. We'll take as many as we can through the course of the discussion. And so just get started on that right away. After a few minutes of conversation, I'm going to start bringing questions from Slido to our panelists as well. Just a few elements for Slido. Tell us who you are, where you're from, if you would, please. Just so that we can give some context. You don't have to, but it's nice for the audience to see that. If you have a particular question for a specific person, please mention that also in your question. We'll put it to them first and then see if the rest of the panel want to comment. So get started on Slido there. Now let's do the high level stuff first. Jorgi, you're the frontline specialist in this, and then I'll come to Stefan a little bit after on terms of what the European Commission is doing really to raise awareness and ensure that all EU citizens are, first of all, aware, but able to engage with lifelong learning, with the skills agenda in a clear and direct way. Jorgi.
Yeah, thank you. I will start with the education vantage point because Stefan is a bit better positioned, I think, to go into the skills. What we see is that in order to promote skills, I mean, one can look at this in a sort of a pyramid way. And the higher you go, of course, the more advanced skills become. But the reality, as we know it from our different statistics and from the regular reporting on the targets that we have set, for example, on the basic digital skills or on the advanced digital skills, of which we need or we want to have 20 million, is that on both accounts, we are not doing as well as we would like to. What I mean by this is that if we extrapolate the growth of the last 5 years and we look forward to 2030, we're not going to reach our targets. This is both for the basic digital skills, where today we are around 54% or 55%, as well as the ICT advanced professionals, people in AI and cybersecurity and so on. So what is super, super important is that we engage all the parts which contribute to the raising awareness on digital skills, which of course is the purpose of the European Year of Skills. But from our vantage point of view, education and training is really paramount. Why? Because if you look at the pyramid, this is the place where you effectively reach everyone before, they go into, let's say, higher education, or they become parts of a company, which can be very, very innovative, or it can be also less innovative in terms of lifelong learning. The main issue here is that we have to get as many people through the education system to develop this type of digital skills. And if you look at data and evidence in Europe, on average, the reality is that, let's say, digital skills development is not necessarily something which is as integrated in our education and training systems. Let's say if you compare it to the way mathematics, language learning, or science is provided in our education systems, this is now happening for decades, maybe even for hundreds of years. If you just take digital skills and you just compare it, either if you look at informatics provision or you take more, let's say, transversal ways to teach digital skills, the reality is that it's a much more of a hit and miss environment. And if we now take back our, let's say, big objectives, our high-level ambition, and we ask ourselves, okay, do we do enough in order to reach those targets? Then the answer should be probably not. This is why, for us, it is very, very important when we speak about the skills mismatch or the skills development and also the context of the European Year of Skills, to say that education and training systems have really a fundamental role. And this is in particular the case for digital skills.
Okay, thank you. I live in Washington, and I was at a speech by the head of Space Command here, which is one of the military, part of the armed forces, but most of the other armed forces don't really take it as an integral part. But the commander, he said that he wants the Space Force to be the eggs in the cake mix. And it seems to me that digital is a little as you've described it, Jorgi, as well. It's not the traditional part of what we do in education, but for our future economy, for our competitiveness, if we don't have digital skills right in the cake mix, the other parts won't work as effectively as well. Stefan, how do you see this in terms of what the Commission is doing to reach the right audience and to achieve these targets, which are behind scale at the moment?
Thank you, Brian. I'll just continue from what Jorgi said. I mean, the European Year we see is a fantastic opportunity to step up the communication, the awareness raising. European years can have had different themes in the past and different aims, but this one is really about getting this message about upskilling, about investment, that the investment in skills is going to pay off both for the individual, for the company. and that there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of good practices out there. Obviously, communicating from Brussels is always going to be a challenge. So we rely, as always, on intermediary actors at national and local levels. Specifically for the year, we have national coordinators, and I think that will be a very powerful tool with top officials in each country who will design and look at existing activities, new activities, and how to get this message out, and also learn from each other to see how is a specific country successful in getting the messages out. Many networks. I think the EU funds is a very important catalyst here. We have over 30 billion available or being used for skills in the European Social Fund Plus. And therefore, the people who are managing these funds, the so-called management authorities, are as well as the national agencies for Erasmus, they are going to be very important players in this as well. I could continue with the different networks, but I think that I would also take out the public employment services, which we work very closely with, also with the private employment services, to bring this message out. And then finally, and I think we'll come back to that, under the Pact for Skills, we have, of course, more concrete measures. We have 15 large partnerships with the pledges to upskill over 6 million people in the EU. So I think that there are many ways, many pathways this information can pass, and we're trying to really exploit all of them in the context of the year.
Yeah, okay, thank you for Stefan. I'm going to come to Sylvia just a second to follow up on this, but just before we do you think there are too many organizations, there are too many partners involved in this as well? Skills Week, for example, requires the delegated action of all the networks across Europe. Do you think that's the most efficient way to get this done, or is this simply a matter of pragmatic politics in the European Union?
I think that sometimes it's complicated. And in fact, our target is, do you hear me?
Yes,
I'm
perfectly.
not sure. Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's depending on each member state. For example, I'm in France. In France, it's very complicated for me, just because we have a lot of actors, regions, public actors, and when we would like to develop some projects, sometimes it's not so simple to coordinate it. But in fact, what we would like really to develop and to plan with the European Year of Skills, and especially in the concerning digital skills, it's to develop some local projects, concrete projects. And I think this is a good idea. And with the regard of the validation of the EU and the European level. So yes, in fact, I know it's not so easy, but we tried with this legislation, this decision of European Year of Skills to promote it, to give a nice regard. It's a little bit communication and marketing, but I hope that we will develop a lot of concrete projects, and which is very important, it's to communicate on the projects, to give maybe some ideas to different actors in different member states, just because I'm sure that we have some nice projects, and it could be a very nice thing to have, to communicate.
Thank you. Let me bring it to Rafaela. Rafaela, it's one thing to say we have nice projects. It's another thing to get people engaged in those projects as well, and to convince them that it's worth their while. And some of the research I've seen in this indicates that people simply don't think that a lot of the lifelong learning projects available to them are worth their time, or the small amount of money even that they're required to pay to participate in them as well. From where you see your organizations meeting stakeholders, what kind of messaging do you think works in terms of convincing people that this is, as we just heard, it's an investment for the future? Investing in skills at an individual level, at a corporate level, is for the long term. Rafaela.
Well, the question is always why people aren't motivated to participate in lifelong learning. I've also seen studies from the OECD that say that motivation or lack of motivation is actually the biggest barrier to participate in lifelong learning. But this is very much also a question of environments where people live, and how conducive they are to learning, how engaging they are. For example, do people get paid training leave? Do people get any financial incentives to participate in lifelong learning? Is there some childcare during course hours for people who have care responsibilities and so on? So this is actually a question very much also of the wider environment that people live in, and especially when we talk about adults. And you also raised the question of investment. Well, whose investment should it be? Of course, learners, individuals themselves might also have this need for an investment if they see a return on investment as well, because learning should be relevant for them. Also, if we talk about workplace learning or work-related learning, then there should be a return on investment. But shouldn't we also look more into public investment for lifelong learning, because this is where we see great challenges. And especially when we again look at adult learning, we now have 0.1% of the GDP spent on adult learning on average across the EU, and still we expect very large results from it. Is this really how it can work? And also, if we look at the European level and European funding, we see that agriculture gets a lot more funding than education and skills. And of course, agriculture is very important. But then again, it's a question also of priorities. Where do we put our priorities? And is learning actually really such a big priority that we always claim it to be? Of course, from our perspective it is, but is it really to policymakers as well?
Okay, well, simply from an economic perspective as well, what you said is the amount of money invested in lifelong learning is it's even just a fraction of that invested in primary and secondary educations, between 3.6 and 4.8% across the European Union, I think, as well. So, that's off scale if you're just investing in early years compared to the next 40 years of a worker's life as well. What's the skills investment? So, Rafaela, do you think we should be viewing lifelong learning more as a public good than simply as an add-on for your career development?
Absolutely, yes. And this is also one of our key demands, that it is considered a human right, and a right for everyone to participate in quality education throughout their life, from the very young to the very old age.
Thank you. Anders, you were talking about the competitiveness of Europe and why skills matters in that context as well. The Swedish presidency, what's its big concern here? How do we ensure that Europe is not just match ready for the coming years, but that we really have the capacity long term to evolve those skills? So if we don't start now, we're going to be behind the curve even further in 10 years time, 20 years time. So this early investment, these critical years, how does the Swedish presidency see this in terms of what's been achieved now and what needs done?
Yeah, no, I think that there are several steps. First of all, we need to know much more, actually, what skill set we have and what skill set we need. So we need to spend much more attention to analysis, to matching, sort of closing the skills gap. Well, to close the skills gap, we need to know what the skills gaps actually are, and that's, I think, we're lacking in many sectors. Another important topic, as Raffaele was pointing to, is making upskilling, reskilling accessible to everybody. I mean, to answer some of the questions that have been posed here, I don't think it's just a matter of mindset that we don't have more people upskilling or reskilling. I think it's also a matter of preconditions. I think for many people, it's financially difficult, and it's also sort of socially difficult to take too much time off to upskill and reskill, unless there is enough support. That's something we're looking into in Sweden, for instance, that we're making sure that those who are in the sort of declining sectors and want to move over to sectors that are sort of on the rise can get substantial support to do that for up to a year's time. So to enable everybody to upskill and reskill, and also to make sure that it's transmitted all through society, that we all need to think of our upskilling and reskilling needs. So I think that's important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Anders. Thomas, we're not competing in a vacuum. It's an international workplace. VodafoneZiggo clearly has an international range in terms of its ability to attract talent as well. What's your experience in terms of drawing talent to work in your company, and also just the general environment that you operate in as well? Do you see a more internationalized approach to skills transfer, talent mobility, and how globally Europe fits with this ambition to be competitive globally with skills?
Yeah, definitely. So if I look at the new hires every month, we see an increasing amount of people coming from outside of the Netherlands, but also outside of the EU, actually, because they bring in skills that are scarce here. So I would definitely say that the talent environment, especially also as we operate more virtually, has become more international than it has ever been before. And also, as the labor market in Europe will become more tight over the coming years, I expect this talent mobility to increase. And I think that we also have our skill gaps. And actually, there is a lot of artificial intelligence supporting us identifying exactly what those skill gaps are. And what I think we also need to talk about is from the perspective of the citizen in Europe or the employee in a company, because learning actually is changing, and changing is out of comfort. And a lot of people will find reasons to postpone it, maybe to do it tomorrow, to start investing or a training maybe next year. And what we have seen is that you need to take away those hurdles and create a sense of urgency to get people to take initiatives. And I think that is also something that we need to think about when we talk about this topic, is how can we create a sense of urgency and make it as seamless as possible for people to start with a development initiative for themselves.
Excellent point. Just on skills gap, it's a good phrase. A lot of people use it, but what do we mean by skills gap, and how do you identify where that gap is and how it should be corrected, Thomas?
Yeah. So what we do is we plan with our business for 5 years into the future, from a financial perspective, but also from an organizational development perspective and a skills perspective. So we know how many skills and what kind of skills we need in 5 years. And from there, we kind of backcast to where we are today. And what we have learned is that there are several AI capabilities that help us identify those skill gaps, because these are often universal. They play in most companies. And when we do that, when we make that very visible, and I heard it in the introductions as well, how many people actually need to develop, but also if you look at your company, how many roles are going to be changing in the next 5 years, that creates this sense of urgency. And we then build kind of the learning journeys with training and other learning interventions to start to develop those skills at scale.
Perfect. Thank you. Very clear, Thomas. Okay, let's go to Slido. See what we've got on Slido. And this is the first question. So it's on the digital divide from Tomasio Sibilia. It's just disappeared. What else is turned on? We'll come back on that in a moment. Okay, I see it again. It's the other side. Okay, on the digital divide point raised by Rafael Akira, but welcoming answers from Stefan and Georgi. Also, how do you reconcile digitized Europe learning with the lack of high connectivity in European rural areas? So Rafaela first, and then Stefan and Georgi, if you want to contribute as well. Rafaela, how do you reconcile digitized Europe learning with the lack of high connectivity in European rural areas? Thank you for that, Tomasio.
Well, this is actually one of the issues that we are struggling with. And yeah, there are some interesting initiatives to provide better broadband connections, also in remote areas, in rural areas. But indeed, the question is always who has access to the technology and who has access to the learning. There are quite a lot of initiatives actually at the very local and regional level to provide learning for digital skills, also for wider skills in community learning centers, in adult education, in other forms of education. So the learning can be provided, at least in many areas. But then if people don't have access to the technology, and if there is no good internet connection, then it still remains an issue. I don't have a solution for this either. I just really hope that in the future, also that the needs of people in rural areas will be considered a bit more when building broadband connections and so on.
Okay, thank you. Stefan, Georgi, you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. No, clearly a challenge. And if you look at it from an EU perspective, which of course will always be a bit limited considering how small part of the budget is coming from the EU in many countries. But we have a number of initiatives going on. We have this structural dialogue, for example, where we discussed with each member state what they were doing on digital skills. And I remember one very good one with Romania where we were talking about this particular challenge and also looking at how you can use the EU funds, which for a country like Romania is a quite substantial part of funding to with the ERDF, the Regional Development Fund, together with the Social Fund, you combine. So you combine the skills development with the infrastructure, and I think the all the funding that has come after in the wake of COVID and the financial challenges, like the RRF. Recovery and Resilience Fund have also focused on these type of issues and reforms. So there is a lot of work in trying to reach out to regions and focusing on digitalization. Also, we issued a policy document, the Commission, in harnessing skills, which also focused on this regional perspective. So there's a lot of understanding. But of course, it also requires very decisive government action and investment in these regions. So I think it's a crucial issue, but a big challenge.
Okay, Georgi, anything to add there? Thank you, Stefan.
I would very much agree with the existing problem of the, let's say, lack of infrastructure in very specific spots and very specific places and regional areas. However, I would also warn a little bit, let's say, from just thinking that this is the real problem, because if anything, the digital divide today really stands much more from the population which does not have the right level of skills to participate in a wide range of digital provisions. This is not to, let's say, hide away a fact that there are specific places where there is no 5G or where there is no fiber, etc., etc. But when we think about specific parts of the population elderly people. There is a whole group of people who are not able to use the services which are provided just because of lack of skills. I would say that we need to really carefully consider what does digital divide mean. And in fact, we think that the digital divide refers at least to equal parts to the lack of, let's say, the connectivity maybe, or the access, which, as I said, there is a problem with. And as Stefan said, there is lots of instruments, especially from the RRF, which are massively being invested into. But on the other hand, it is really of the mismatch between availability of these kind of services, but population which cannot take them into account. And this is a real danger the more we move into digitalization of e-government services, e-health, digital learning, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. Points well made. And let's go to just another question and a point from Esko Rinakainen. And I think it's more for Thomas. What are some of the artificial intelligence tools that can identify skill gaps that you just mentioned, Thomas? Anything in particular that's they can go through?
Maybe two examples. So we created this unlimited learning platform where training is available for all our employees. And this is with Archipel in the Netherlands. They built an AI tool that can do this also on an individual basis. So people can basically submit what they are good at, what their ambition is. And the tool will then tell them what kind of skills they can develop. And on a company level, to be honest, ChatGPT already does a good job, but also TechWolf in Belgium is a company that does this for several companies in Europe, where they help with AI to basically determine the capability gaps in the next years.
Thank you. We'll come back to AI in a bit more detail in a few minutes. And just another couple of comments here. Nello Amarencia says the sense of urgency must be created for the individual, not only for the employer. We must provide clear answers to what's in it for me from an employee perspective that will help him or her be motivated to change ideas on how to do this. Maybe someone wants to pick up on that. And Shweta says, what are the panelists' thoughts on utilizing tools people are already using? So bringing attention to this is a recent study that found that girls who play video games are 3 times as likely to pursue STEM careers than girls who do not, even amongst girls from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So who wants to touch on those? Let's do the STEM career as well, and girls. Anybody have any thoughts on this about the incentive? I think really what it goes to is how to incentivize early learning in terms of digital skills, which carry through perhaps with sectors, not just girls, but with sectors of society that wouldn't instinctively go towards the digital element, perhaps. Any comments on that, Sylvie? Thomas first.
Yes, maybe. Yes, I have a comment. It's very major questions. We know that women in science careers remain a minority. We have the problem in all the EU. We try to develop it, but it's not simple. And we have, I think, to combat stereotypes, to encourage and retain women in STEM careers. We have the problem in the orientation at school, at first level at school, just because it's difficult to explain the jobs, the careers, especially to the girls and to the women. I think that we have to develop local initiatives to encourage women to access digital skills. I did it, for example, in my city, in Marseille, with NEETs, young people. When we developed some programs in coding, for example, I have a program which is Women Coders, only with women. it's very difficult just because we have no candidates. Maybe 3% of women by candidates. It's very difficult, but we tried and we did it, and it's a good example of what we can do with in the sectors of training, with a structure which is in Germany also. It's with a European dimension. For me, it's maybe a good idea also to combine the acquisition of skills and with mobility, especially European mobility. I try to do it with Erasmus and so for this needs, this young people who are very far of the labor market. It's an example of programs that we have to develop, but it's very difficult to be attractive and to recruit and to have some candidates. Only for 30 stage person trainees, it was very difficult, but we did it.
Okay.
We did it, and now they have some new job with coding and new career.
Okay. Thank you, Sylvie. Anders, just to build off that a little bit and go back to some of the comments you made earlier, is this problem of getting, girls in school years and women as they progress through to the workforce, is this partly a problem of social mobility because of the way society is organized, or do you think this is to do with how we educate as well, that the digital side, well, that's more of a man's thing, that's that leave the women with the arts? And do we still have this kind of mentality in our education system which limits the opportunity for parts of society to progress with digital skills, Anders?
Yeah, yes, both yes and no, really. I think it's probably that we stick to old sort of stereotypes, but also that we don't really explain enough or good enough what these new jobs actually entail. I was in a discussion with the gaming industry, which is it's very male dominated actually at the moment, but they're making big efforts to get up the quota of female employers. And they pointed out that you think that the main skills and the main job in gaming industry is coding, but actually only, I think 27% of their workforce actually work with coding and has that kind of very more hardcore digital background, while I think 32% has a more humanistic background. Artists, actually historians, people with a very different background, but now working with something that is quite sort of central to digital kind of work. So I mean, this is also needs to be highlighted, the fact that the digital jobs of tomorrow are not really the traditional digital jobs of yesterday, that they are built on a much wider range of competences, and you can have a much wider you can have different backgrounds and still end up in the digital sector. I think that's important, especially maybe for the young women to highlight this, that you don't need to be a coder. You can choose a different educational path, but you can add on things and then still find good jobs in the more digital sectors.
Thank you, and it's a great response to a super question. We have Georgi, then Thomas, then Rafaela also want to reply to this question as well. So clearly top marks for the question. Georgi, you first.
Yes, I think there is no doubt that affirmative sort of action initiatives and role modeling and promotion of let's say leading roles and examples have a big impact. And Sylvie mentioned some. I am also familiar with a couple of initiatives at EU level, such as the Girls Go Circular, where digital and entrepreneurial skills are developed in a combination as a sort. But there is also this other element that education and universal education in digital disciplines from an earlier age on have a huge impact. And this is very, very clearly demonstrable in data, which you can look at the different member states just by asking a question such as, where is computer science and informatics being provided as a core part of the education and not as some sort of optional, rather, opt-in or like a subject of choice. And you can go as far as to see the historical legacy of systems which have been providing this type of computer science education for the last 20, 30 years. And you can look at the level of ICT graduates and break this down into females and males, and you will see astonishing results, such as, for example, that in Bulgaria, which is normally not a digital leader in many, many rank lists, it's the country with the highest amount of female graduates in ICT, just because there is no self-selection, which takes place at the ages of 12, 13, 14, which is when girls often decide that this is not for them, etc., etc. So there is a real case here for systematic access to digital skills development in a comprehensive form where everyone is part of, and not sort of left to the role models or to the who your father was, because that's a self-fulfilling prophecy that we often see. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi. So let's avoid self-selection where possible. Thomas, you wanted to add a comment, and Raphael?
Yeah, so maybe two things. So first of all, the research from the Vodafone Foundation has found that 38% of teachers in Europe are not well prepared to support digital literacy development. That's an astonishing amount, and I think that we should be able to provide them with the education they need to be able to teach these skills to their students. But also, I think that making these skill development programs that can also be online available to everyone can also help to do that in Europe. And it's often still exclusive access for the people who know how to get to certain content or who can afford access to certain content. And that is, I think, definitely creating a divide that can be, I think, relatively easily addressed across Europe.
Thank you. Raphaela.
Yeah, I wanted to especially react to what Anders mentioned about the 27% or so in ICT jobs that are actual coding, because there is indeed a lot of awareness raising needed on jobs in this sector. And when we look at STEM subjects, or how subjects are built in schools in general, we need to look at what is the outcome then, because while it is important to promote these kinds of skills, and I think game-based learning, for example, is really great in motivating also girls to get into STEM jobs and STEM studies and so on, we still shouldn't forget that there is a whole other part of education that's also very important, and that can help actually people to make sense of what's happening in ICT, in mathematics and sciences, and that's all the creative subjects. And this is why we at the European level now talk about STEAM subjects very much, that puts the art or the arts education into STEM, and that helps people to get these creative capabilities and logical thinking capabilities that are also needed for these subjects, but also to create a more holistic vision of education and this area specifically. And what Thomas just mentioned on professionalization of teachers is very much true for educators along the entire lifelong learning spectrum. And if we want to promote these kinds of skills specifically, then we should also look at not only what's happening inside of schools, but also in early childhood education already, and then, of course, in adult education as well.
Okay, thank you. Stefan, just a quick comment on agility and leadership as well here. Agility in the sense that this is not a fixed target. Skills is a constantly evolving scenario, and the agility of the individual and the corporation or the institution to learn and adapt is probably never going to be tested more than in this coming AI age. From the European Commission's perspective as well, how do you assist the learning of leaders and corporations to be more agile and to make these changes more quickly? Because it's fine to have a policy document and the long-term strategy, still hard to reach those targets as we've heard, but the policy process tends to lag behind the technology. So how do we train the leaders to be more agile? Stefan?
Thanks, Brian. You mean more agile on skills or more agile in general?
On the strategy, more agile in general, because the challenge is to move the skills in the right direction, skills agenda in the right direction at the right time, recognizing what the corporation, the institution needs, and adapting quickly. But that takes a skill set in its own right as well. So the leadership dimension of agility to make us more competitive, to make Europe more competitive quickly.
Yeah, to me, it's a lot about what we've been discussing so far, and again, one of the challenges are that everybody in this panel, I think we are all convinced of the investment in skills, and we hear these very impressive statistics, and we do this immediate correlation between competitiveness and skills. As I said initially, to me it was a very important step when the Commission put skills as one of the pillars in the Green Industrial Act, and that is the type of message. And when the Commission President and when the European Parliament, the Council are really lifting up skills to the top level, or linked not to general social policy, but really to the future of European productivity. I think that's, and we saw, for example, in Davos, skills was present in almost all the sessions. So we are getting a debate at a very high level. And I think when I discuss with top businesses, I won't mention any names, but they are now moving to a very different type of strategy. A top multinational told me that only 50% of their recruitment ads require a formal qualification, because they see the need for a much more informal recruitment process. However, 20% of the only 20% recruited are recruited without higher education diplomas. So there is this needs to more. I think the top level is starting to understand it, but it needs to go down in the organization. It needs to go down to the HR managers, to the recruiters, to understand that you have to be much more innovative and breaking down barriers when you're thinking about skills and taking responsibility in the company, in the learning institution, to experiment and not get stuck in what we have done the last 30 years. And that is, any such change. I think it was fascinating with COVID, when we could move to online work, but it was because of an outer catastrophe, and hopefully we will not have that catastrophe in the skills area. We're getting closer to it, but we need this to really make us all think differently. But I think the signals from the top political level and the top business level are there now. So I'm rather positive.
Okay, thank you. Thomas, I want to dig down a little bit for a few minutes on AI and how AI is shifting not just our skills agenda, but what it means for our competitive ability globally as well. So A few weeks ago, I had dinner with somebody who works at IMF, a senior level on the tech side as well. And they said, we're basically writing all our strategies on ChatGPT and then editing them. Now, he has the advantage of a PhD in philosophy. And he said, it means that he has some training in how to interrogate the system in terms of logic and how that would work. And so he spoke a lot about that. He also said, the majority of people don't have these skills and they're going to produce mediocrity. The byproduct of ChatGPT for most organizations, most individuals, is going to be mediocre. And in a competitive global environment, that doesn't work. So, Thomas, how do you see AI helping European skills agenda? How do you see it as a challenge as we compete globally?
I think that you always need to continue to think for yourself, right? So ChatGPT can only provide you with context, can get information that is already there, but cannot think about something new. So you need to be able to take that information, also really assess carefully what information is trustworthy and what's not, because you don't have the sources, right? And then apply it yourself. So that means that analytical skills, critical thinking, but also communication skills are becoming more important, I think. And AI today is where the iPhone was in 2008, 2009, I think. So that means that if you think about that, what's going to come down the line in the next 10, 20 years is immense. And I think that business leaders need, and leaders in society need to invest time in really understanding what it means. And this is also what we just discussed. How can you kind of accelerate a culture of skill development in a company? And although a lot of us are kind of convinced of the importance and the magnitude of this challenge, it's also important to just take time with your leaders, sit down and do the coding yourself. Go and code for a day, do an analysis, you apply ChatGPT. And this is something that we did with the top 200 of Vodafone as well when we were starting the digital transformation of the company. So you not only conceptually know what coding means, but that you actually really understand it, because then you can best inspire others to develop themselves into this direction. So this is, I think, what the responsibility of leaders is when it comes to these AI and digital technologies.
So understand your subject before you go making policies about it, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anders, you have a comment?
Yes, yeah. I mean, you really point to some important things there, Thomas, and thank you very much for that. I think and a special difficulty in the future will also be how do we then validate and sort of quality assure what people really know. And I think we want exactly what you point to, the ability to think critically, analyze, come up with new things. But that, of course, we need to know who really do that and who uses these artificial tools to do it. So I think the emphasis on validating informal knowledge, transversal skills, knowledge that is not just formal, I think that will become even more difficult, but more important in the future. So validation of skills is really, yeah.
Yeah, just on that, Anders, the idea that we will actually need to know whether AI was used or not, is the skill set that we're moving towards really a blended form of communication, blended form of art, blended form of engineering, and discovery as well, where these critical analytical tools that we have as individuals, these soft skills that we have as artists or marketing experts or communication experts, that has to be blended with AI in the future. That this is going to be part of our productivity, if not our creative process as well. Anders?
Yes, I do really believe so, that this is where we add a lot of added value as individuals, because they are not usually found in a traditional CV. These are skills that you usually have acquired while working, while interacting with other people, while taking on even informal learning. So, but they need to be highlighted, because that's really where we can add value, and where we can blend together with the AIs and use the tools that they provide us with. Because we're going to use them, and it's going to be a big difference. But our added value as individuals and employed persons really is to add the creative and the skills that we have acquired. But they need to, of course, somehow to be validated and shown to others.
Thank you. About 5 years ago, I was teaching journalism to some 20-somethings, and telling them basically, if you don't have multitask, and if you can't bring a human dimension to your storytelling, you won't have a job, because AI will do this for you. And we already see this in media today. It's much more cost effective to produce data-driven stories at a fraction of the cost, and we're going to see this driving a lot of other sectors, I think, as well. Anybody else want to comment on AI? So I see a lot of nodding heads during the conversation. Sylvie, how do you see, in your experience in HR in the past, that AI has a positive and negative effect in terms of skills training, in terms of productivity and competitiveness? Sylvie?
I can say that it's already different depending on the sector. I was human resources director in the technology sector, smart cards industry. So it was natural. The level of training was very high in the company. Now it's Thales. At the beginning, it was a startup, and now it's a big company. It was natural. After that, I was human resources director in the cleaning sector with a lot of women, first level in terms of competency training. And we try to develop, for example, applications on phone for to have the contact with clients, customers, in the services. It's different level. So I think it's really different, and depending on the sectors. And another point which is very important, it's a subject of social dialogue with unions. It's a structural dialogue, and for me it's an important point also. But I know sometimes it's difficult. What I would like to add is, I think it's maybe a good point to have a common framework, if possible, at the European level. For example, we have Europass, we have Dishcomp, I don't know. But in fact, I see that people don't know really this framework. So they write, I have some competencies, but what is the framework? How we recognize the level? Maybe it's a subject to be more simple.
Okay, Rafael, I want to make a comment, but just to tag on to that, there were some comments on Slido. Antonio Gonzalez Gomez said, constant learning, skill-based, lifelong learning, digitalization, and the need to keep up with fast-moving developments all sounds like very innovative, groundbreaking ideas. Is this the idea? Is this the beginning of the end of traditional learning, university degrees, diplomas, and the like? Also, we have a comment from Katerina. Thomas raised the issue of critical thinking, which in my opinion is essential at all levels and in the future. I have a question for Stefan there. We'll bring that to Stefan just after Rafaela. You want to make a comment, Rafaela?
Yeah, I think what we witness is really a shift towards more cognitive work, in a way, more intellectual work in all parts of jobs. And we used to focus very much on low-skilled people and how to reach out to them and get them into learning or further education. But now, especially with automation and artificial intelligence, we see that it's also the middle sector and the higher segments of the labor market that will require this continuous upskilling and reskilling and so on. So this is also a challenge for the entire education system and lifelong learning system, and actually also connected to one of the questions that we just mentioned. I think that there will be much more modular learning in the future, and we will need to continuously upgrade our skills. But then the question is always, how do you get people into that, and how do you make it relevant, and how do you also make it a joy to learn and to participate? It shouldn't just be a paradigm to always be in learning and then always cram for exams, but for example, self-assessment can be very beneficial and helpful in the future.
Thank you. We're close on time. Thomas, you want to follow up just a quick point on traditional education, and then Stefan will bring a question to you, and then we're going to do the 30-second wrap up as well for everyone. Thomas.
Yeah, following that Slido question and also the comment that Stefan made, there are tools where candidates for roles can do assessments online, including also AI tools that look at the psychometrics of candidates. So you can really assess at scale. And that means that recruiters can stop looking at formal titles or formal education that people have followed, and it's becoming less relevant as a recruitment tool. So I think diplomas will become significantly less relevant, and skills will become substantially more relevant. And I think that traditional education will continue to exist, but needs to adapt very quickly to this environment to meet the needs of corporations and institutions these days.
Okay, thank you. We're close on time. Stefan, just a quick response to a question from Divya. Is there any further information on the planned initiatives under the Year of Skills and timeline, for example, Cybersecurity Academy, and that you'd be able to share?
We have a website. Obviously, as the co-legislators who are finalizing the decision, we have not put everything on there yet. But now we have met. The coordinators met on Friday. So I think the best is to go to just Google the European Year for Skills, European Commission, and you will see plenty of activities which will be constantly updated with the different academies and events. So yeah, okay. I think I'll stop there. That's
perfect. Thank you, Stefan. So now we're just going to go 30 seconds each, and we're pretty close in time with 6 panelists to speak. Thomas, let's start with you. So your key takeaway for today, Thomas.
So I understand the complexity of driving a culture change when it comes to learning on a European level. But I think we really need to start thinking from the perspective of the individual. So what do they need to start developing themselves? And that should be the beginning and the middle and the end every time when we discuss this topic.
Thank you. Rafaela, 30 seconds.
Very similar to what Thomas just said, we need to put the learner at the center and need to look at skills from a more holistic understanding. Yeah.
Thank you. Georgi, 30 seconds.
I would like to just make a short announcement that I can agree with basically most of what my co-speaker said, and we in the Commission are going to put forward in April a package on digital education and skills composed of 2 council recommendations, one on digital education and the ecosystem, which by the way includes also the connectivity and the infrastructure, and the other on the topic of digital skills and how we can improve it in education and training. The Commission has limited competences in this field, but I think that if we all take education and digital education as seriously as we take some other things in the digital age, then probably we can progress together. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Anders, 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, I think the very, very important things has been said, and I really take on what Thomas said about how the process of selecting employers will change in the future, where much more will depend on your personal background and your individual skills rather than your formal education. I think that will be a big shift and require a lot of new things from a lot of people. So I really take that as a lesson learned from this discussion.
Anders, thank you so much. Sylvie, 30 seconds.
Yes, I think we have to continue to promote lifelong training at different levels, which is important, at different level, from basic to high level. And we didn't speak, for example, of the subject of the use of the social networks. It's a question. For the politicians, it's a question, just because we have the problematic of fake news, for example, and we have to work at different levels.
Thank you so much. Last word, Stefan.
Thanks for the honor. For me, and I think for all of us, the digital transformation, which is essential for democracy, for productivity, the green transformation, which is essential for this planet and humankind to continue, will depend to a very large extent on how we manage to do this skill transformation. So it's not a side issue, it's the issue. And let's all work together in the European Year of Skills, like in this event, to see what solutions we can find. Thanks.
Stefan, thank you. Thanks also to our team in the Brussels studio, Malta, Zoran, Shifra, and Bonya. Excellent team. You don't see them and the huge effort they make to get all this put together. So thank you for them. And also to Giga Europe for their support for the program today. Wherever you are, I wish you a good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I'm Brian Maguire.